In the race for energy and fuel, we have forgotten the real resources that sustain us: air, water, wind, and the delicate balance for nature itself. The energy race, while framed as progressive, is undeniably one of the biggest reasons for deteriorating health of our climate. We know that under capitalism, there is no true ethical consumption. But we must at least have the decency to choose the path that is the least unethical, the least extractive, and the most respectful to both people and planet. India today stands at a critical juncture. On one hand, our transition to a low carbon future through nuclear power, solar fields, wind farms, and battery driven mobility is framed as a promise of sustainability and self reliance. On the other hand, the very materials that power this future come with their own shadow costs. Uranium mining in places like Tummalapalle in Andhra Pradesh and Jaduguda in Jharkhand has left communities grappling with poisoned groundwater and generations of health crises. Globally, titanium mining, the backbone of the battery revolution, has consumed entire water tables, degraded soils, and pushed fragile ecosystem towards collapse. Not to mention the humanitarian side of it all as well. These impacts are not even that are not evenly borne. They fall disproportionately on marginalized communities whose lives and lands are sacrificed for national and global ambition of green growth. So, as we gather here today, the central question is not only how India diversifies its energy resources for security and autonomy, but how it does so without replicating the same patterns of exploitation and extraction that brought us to the crisis in the first place. Which brings me to Shaurya. What does energy justice look like when uranium extraction brings water toxicity and disrupted livelihoods in Indian villages despite natural energy gains? How do we weigh in the trade offs between nuclear diversification and village level suffering, especially in places like Tummalapalle and Jaduguda, where tailings and groundwater contamination continues to devastate local health?
All right, thank you so much, Navya, for that excellent question. And let's get this roundtable started. So, firstly, I would like to draw on the definition of energy justice in itself. So, following first principles thinking, what does energy justice mean? So, again, like it's quite there in the name itself. It talks about ecologically efficient extraction of energy that is from diverse sources and in a manner that's not as extractive of local resources as a lot of practices in the world are, and to make sure whatever benefits that a nation or a community reaps out of energy are maximized for everyone. That means not only just a select few are getting all the benefits of the energy whilst others are exploited. And again, this word in itself is find itself in a contrary position to what is happening in Jharkhand and Andhra Pradesh right now. So, energy justice in the context of uranium mining in India must confront the paradox wherein natural gains from nuclear diversification are purchased with severe localized cost, borne by the most vulnerable communities in Jharkhand and Andhra Pradesh, particularly the Mundu tribes in Jadugunda, Jharkhand. So, the site of this situation is rather unfortunate again because it's been going for a long time. For example, the Jadukunda site in Jharkhand is India's oldest nuclear uranium mining site used for nuclear technology, nuclear development, energy powerhouses, but it has left a rather horrific trail behind. For example, in 2008, a study by the Indian Doctors for Peace and Development found that over 30% of the children in Jadugunda region exhibited symptoms of genetic deformities. The same studies reveal rising cases of cancers, miscarriages, stillbirths, and infertility, all of which are consistent with chronic low level radiation exposure. Following up on these reports, in 2018, almost a decade later, the Andhra Pradesh Pollution Control Board collected groundwater samples from borewells in August 29 to, let's say, verify these reports. And upon verifying this, it showed a show cause notice to UCIL, that is the Uranium Corporation Limited, India. And the samples showed an alarming levels of uranium. For example, the samples revealed 690 of 4,000 parts per billion of contamination level in the water. To give context to viewers who might not be familiar with what's the safety regulation. The permissible drinking water limit, according to the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board of India, water is supposed to be contaminated above 60 parts per billion. What they found in 2018 was 690 to 4,000, more than 100 times. In addition, the concentration of alkalinity, heavy materials, and magnesium exceeded permissible limits as well. The point was that the Uranium Corporation of India was supposed to attach a clay based protective layer around the trailing pond. The trailing pond is a pond filled with trailings, which is the remnants of uranium extraction that possess radioactive and harmful material for the environment, and you attach a layer of clay to prevent it from contaminating groundwater, which is essential for the survival of the people there because most of them work in agriculture and they use that water for their daily lives for irrigating their fields. So not only this water stunted their plantations, but it also really critically impacted their real life health. UCIL got away with this by saying that the contamination has been within permissible levels according to very outdated IAEA standards, plus the orchestrated studies from IIT Kharagpur, which corroborated UCIL's statement. So a lot of reports, but most of them contradict each other. And UCIL again never really came through on their developmental promises as well when we're looking at the broader picture of energy justice, because when such projects are generally undertaken, the extractive authority promises a lot of engagements. For example, they promise that they will build schools and developmental initiatives in these areas, and they will provide mining safety workshops to make sure all the safety protocols are followed through. But again, in this case, those things didn't happen. The school hasn't yet been built in Andhra Pradesh, and mining regulations haven't been followed, which led to us very devastating health consequences for the residents of these villages. Energy justice, in that sense, demands recognition that the benefits of nuclear power, urban lights, and economic growth are socialized, and their harms, which are incredibly localized, should not be such and not be largely invisible at the policy level. Now, as I say that, I would like to offer some glimpses of what kind of havoc uh, this. One second. All right. What kind of havoc is being uh, one second, I'm having a screen sharing issue. All right. So these pictures display the very sad health consequences that have emerged as a result of uranium mining. So if I can draw your attention to the feet of this migrant worker here, you can see that his feet are underdeveloped. This again has been affiliated with the Uranium Corporation of India Limited, uranium mining and radiation exhibitions where they haven't really accounted for safety and they haven't really taken all the necessary precautions to ensure the safety of villagers nearby. Following on this picture again represents women farmers who have been diagnosed with malignant tumors on their faces, which can only be go away with surgery. That is also only a chance that they might live a safe, healthy life afterwards. Plus, these surgeries they cannot afford because their agricultural crops growth was stunted by the same water that has put a very dark shadow over their life. Coming through one of the larger problems that the water has created is of infertility amongst women. So, as in the picture, we can see Namika Soren, again a farmer, with her very young kid who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy soon after his birth. And this is her exact quote: children are born with physical disabilities or people with cancer, but our sorrow doesn't end there. She said this after having this child who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy after 3 miscarriages. Studies have also found that women in these regions have faced much more reproductive damages and have unusually large periods which can last up to 60 days, like inconsistent frequencies. This is again one of the journalists, Akriti Lahare, from Indian Express, talked about this crisis where she said that the locals were not warned, were not consulted, and now they're dying. And I would like to conclude my answer to this via her statement. As India marches towards self reliance in energy, it must also uphold dignity, transparency, and justice. Because I completely agree with the national interest mandate that yes, we need to extract uranium, we need to go for energy diversification, we need to be self sufficient in energy. Because as we have all seen in the current geopolitical environment, where a lot of things are unfolding in front of us, we really need to be energy reliant and self sufficient. We cannot really be dependent on anyone, especially very energy rich countries or energy exploitative countries like China and the United States. In that light, we surely should be focusing on developing our uranium, but this really is in the way because let's be honest, nothing about these pictures resembles the word justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaurya, for the wonderful visual and comprising answer that really showed us how we can see how corporations push and cross our limits and the limits of climate sustainability and justice itself. These people care nil about the people and the planet, and the correct word I would use for such corporations and people behind these corporations is eco-terrorist, which leads us to question how much do corporations lie, greenwash, and distract us from the truth. Which leads me to the next question to Varsha, that is, how does the inevitable extraction cost of lithium challenge the narrative of batteries as clean energy?
Okay, so I'm Barsha and I'll be answering that question. So, when we all picture batteries or electric vehicles, we see the very symbol of clean energy. We see cars running without smoke, cities storing renewable power, or humanity moving away from fossil fuels. But beneath all of that clean story lies a much dirtier truth: the hidden costs of lithium extraction. So, lithium is essential for batteries, smartphones, and renewable energy storages. But mining it is very energy intensive, polluting, and land degrading, and has serious risks to groundwater. Even if its footprint is lower than fossil fuels, the invisible costs challenge the idea that batteries are automatically green. Today, Australia leads the global lithium production and it's followed by Chile and China. And countries like Argentina, India, Thailand are rushing to join this white gold or lithium race. But the extractive industries account for 90% of the biodiversity loss and over half of the global emissions. More importantly, mining also brings human rights abuses, displacement of indigenous peoples, and labor exploitations. Once the minerals leave the ground, mining companies profit while local communities are left with poverty and contamination. And along global supply chains, the benefits of clean technology remain highly unequal. The very people who bear the harms of mining rarely share in its gains. For example, in the Atacama Desert in Chile, part of the lithium triangle spanning Argentina, Bolivia, and China, and Chile, it, uh, it holds nearly three-quarters of the world's lithium, and it's a place where indigenous communities have survived by adapting to this harsh landscape for centuries. But the lithium mining is draining their lifeline. Um, each ton of lithium consumes up to 2 million liters of water, depleting freshwater reserves and salinizing underground aquifers. In Chile alone, mining companies already use up to 65% of their local freshwater, leaving farmers and indigenous groups struggling to survive. The Licanantai people, for example, depend on salt lakes high in the Andes for water, yet those lakes are being bled dry. So while lithium is hailed as the beacon of hope in the climate fight, in the Atacama Desert, it leaves communities literally high and dry. Imagine what that would mean if India began mining in this already water scarce regions. So we have to remember that clean energy cannot come at the expense of drinking water and agriculture. So, furthermore, lithium, the backbone of our green transition, ironically has a very heavy carbon footprint. Producing a single ton can emit around 15 to 18 tons of carbon dioxide, which is equal to fueling a car for more than 3 years. And this is excluding the process of transport or emission amounts. So, effectively, what we tailpipe often shifts back into the atmosphere uh, at the mine. So the damage doesn't only stop there, but only 20 to 40% of the lithium brine pumped out of the ground becomes usable lithium. The rest is laced with toxic chemicals, contaminates our soils and water, and has significant consequences. An example is the flamingo population in the Atacama that has fallen by 10% since the mining began. And in Tibet, a 2016 spill from a Chinese lithium mining company has polluted its leaky river so badly that it killed masses of fish and poisoned grazing livestock. Apart from this, the harm is cultural too. Indigenous people lose their sacred land, water, and traditional livelihoods. A global demand for batteries is coming at the direct expenses of these local survival. Now, looking closer to home, India's clean energy ambitions collide with reality when it comes to the discovery of the presumably 5.9 million tons of lithium resources in the Salal Haimana area of Jammu and Kashmir in 2023, which could possibly be the seventh largest deposit in the world. On paper, this promises energy security and a stronger foothold in the global battery economy, but the location of these reserves raises serious environmental, social, and political concerns. The deposit lies in the Chenab River, which which acts as a lifeline for drinking water and agriculture in the region and downstream in areas of Pakistan. Mining here could deplete the groundwater source, salinize the aquifers, and contaminate the river system, sparking both ecological damage and cross border disputes. The reserves are also in a fragile Himalayan ecosystem which is vulnerable to deforestation, landslides, and climate change. Open pit mining and chemical leaching would further disrupt this delicate balance of soil, forest, and biodiversity, making restoration more challenging compared to other flatter areas. On top of this, the region's political volatility makes large scale mining much more riskier. Jammu and Kashmir remains one of the most militarized zones in the world, and international observers, including the Center for Climate and Security, warn us that lithium extraction here could inflame local discontent and even heighten the India Pakistan tensions. So, indeed, early attempts that aimed at auctioning these mines already failed twice because most of the major companies say that there's geopolitical tension, instability, or community opposition, so they don't want to risk putting their businesses here. And the villagers in Salal, also called the Lithium Village, have expressed their worry that India's electric dreams will cost them their livelihoods. So, if we ignore this, this could also echo the tragic story of uranium mining in Jharkhand, where the local communities bore the existence of the effects of the toxic cost of national projects. So, when we look at the way forward, we need honesty. Clean energy is not automatically clean. Extraction Extraction carries hidden burdens, and the solution lies in direct lithium extraction technologies that drastically reduce the water use, or battery recycling to cut dependence on new mining, or stronger governance, ensuring community consent and land restoration and revenue sharing. So, in conclusion, lithium batteries are very important for India's energy future, but calling them clean without counting the cost tells only half the story. The real question isn't whether we pursue lithium, but how can we build a better battery economy that is green in the air, yet just as sustainable on the ground? That is the real test of our clean energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you for the answer, Varsha. There was compile and amazing. Uh, we saw how liars lie and they pollute. They lie to the people, saying one energy is better than the other, and we know the truth now. There is no green energy. One is not better than the other. All of them are in some way or the other this give the same effect to the planet. We must reduce our consumption, or else the people with the least consumption get affected the most, and slowly we will lose ourselves and the planet. Now, this leads me to the next question to Arpita. In expanding coal and oil production for baseline energy, how do emissions and ecological degradation intersect with existing inequality?
So honestly, I also did a lot of research on the uranium and coal and lithium extraction that's currently happening in Jug, I'm sorry, Jaduguda and Tummalapalle. I'm so sorry, my pronunciation is not the best, but I feel like it is the extent to which extraction-related harms disappropriately impact communities cannot be understood without looking at this through an intersectional lens. In India, it's very important to note that there are a lot of these intersectionalities create, what's it called, double, triple layers and of burden, amplifying the harm because of these vulnerabilities. And it's also important to note that these are not evenly shared by the people, this harm, and that's why I feel this is very important. So first, I'd like to talk about the caste and tribal marginalization. Firstly, these areas where mining and oil extraction takes place in India are areas which are predominantly inhabited by Adivasi and lower caste communities, which are basically historically excluded from decision-making processes. They do not get a say in how, because all these processes directly impact them. These are processes that will impact their bodily autonomy, their decision-making, their day-to-day life. Every decision they take in their day-to-day life will be impacted by them, and they have no say in any of these. Representation is minimal, and also these communities face a double burden. First of all, they are displaced, and because of land acquisition they have to build these mines. These projects are extremely extensive and they take a lot of time to complete. And the thing is, they're also employed within these mines and oil extraction projects in extremely hazardous working conditions. And the thing is, in India, caste hierarchy is something that is very, very um, ingrained in our society, and this often also dictates how labor allocation takes place. For example, Dalit and tribal workers are disproportionately employed in the most unsafe, and they are given the most difficult manual roles, for example. And the thing is, because of the existing, like I said, the caste hierarchy is so ingrained in India, it is often presumed that this is their job, this is what they are supposed to do. They are not given the proper what's it called, equipment for cutting costs, because they need to increase the profit margins or whatever. And they are off, like Shaurya said, they're exposed to radiation, toxic dust, contaminated water, and everything. Next, I'd like to talk about the gender dimensions. So women bear the reproductive and caregiving burdens anyways, and especially in case of this, caregiving is already something that is not considered as work or labor in the traditional sense. In 2019, women were finally allowed to work in mines, and before that, they're still predominantly employed in the informal sectors. They have their like contractual basis or as casual laborers performing low skilled hazardous tasks such as breaking stones, cleaning, etc. And because of that, they often face exploitation, unequal pay, and poor working conditions. And another point I'd like to add is they are also not free from sexual assault in these cases as well. Moving on, again, something that Shaurya covered was the health risks. So studies conducted in these areas surrounding uranium mining basically have also documented a disproportionately high rates of health issues amongst women. I'd like to focus on women first. So firstly, reproductive health problems such as miscarriages, like the pictures that were shown, infertility, and cognitive not even cognitive, but even like physical deformities in children even before they are born, because what the mothers are consuming in the form of air, in the form of water, everything is so contaminated, like the pictures we saw. And Shora during the day had also sent a reel across to all of us, which showed again some really horrific images. Women have also reported losing 6 to 7 children before birth, miscarriages. And the thing is, there is, because these all this is taking place in such rural areas, there is very little medical recognition, and compensation is something that cannot even, that is a distant dream. Because of these radiations, they remain, because they are tied economically to working in these areas as well. They are trapped, and they are trapped within this area of where they are forced to inhale and consume toxic substances against their will, because again, like I said, no decision making, right? Because of the power they hold and the status, their status in society. Moving on, most uranium and coal mines and even oil extraction sites are situated in rural belts, like I said before. Infrastructure for medical infrastructure, transport, and everything is very it's not up to the mark, and this makes it extremely difficult for them. Lack of protective gear, unsafe housing near these water dumps, and there's poor awareness of the harms that this actually carries, living in these areas, because of lack of education, because of everything like I said. This also leads to this weakens collective, like the bargaining and negotiating that they could have. For example, urban labor in urban areas, they know the concepts of mobilizing and what's it called, unions that they can form to protest. However, in these areas, when how they say it, jab roti kapda makan, and when the fight is at such a basic level, um mobilizing and every all these things are not a priority, when priority is to just live, just to be alive the next day. Next, furthermore, Adivasi women in rural mining zones have experienced the greatest exposure, and they have their chances of raising their voices and redressal is the least. Lower caste men also, they have to end up taking up the riskiest tasks in mines, and they face direct bodily harm, no equipment. And yeah, I'd like to just conclude by saying that intersectional identity intensifies the exposure to extraction related harms in India. And this is something that cannot be ignored. I'd like to talk about a Hollywood movie. It's very popular. It's called Erin Brockovich. It was also, so basically, it's about this lawyer who I think there was a 33 billion or some really huge amount settlement she got for the people in this little town who were facing who basically had were facing a lot of health issues because of contaminated water, because of the, I think, I'm so sorry, I forgot the name, Pacific Gas and Electric Company. So basically there was a lot of energy extraction happening, and because of that the water was getting contaminated, so the families in that area were getting sick. But the thing is, in India, getting these for people in such rural areas is also extremely difficult, because intersectionality is often ignored, caste realities are often ignored, and it's very easy for us to say all of this sitting in these AC rooms as with so much privilege, enjoying the fruit of the what these people actually have to bear. So yeah, that's what I like to say. Over to you, Rabia.
Thank you so much for that, Arpita. That was very well put, firstly. And secondly, am I audible? Correct. Okay, so continuing on, thank you so much for using the phrase that they're trapped in that locality, because I think that's the truth, right? Like, for example, most of these people and most of the people who form a part of these communities, firstly, they bear the heaviest brunt of all these disasters because of their identity. And secondly, it's like, for example, like in the movie that you refer to, right? That was a case of exploitation, but that was a case of exploitation for, let's say, 3 years, 4 years. These people, like the reports have been coming in from 2008. It's 2025 right now. It's 17 years of exploitation going on and on and on, and very limited legal and policy based progress. We have seen so many women have so many miscarriages. Even one miscarriage in itself is a very painful and traumatic process for any individual to go through. We are seeing kids being born without proper organs, proper limbs, and limited legal consequences for the people inflicting all this damage. So again, it's something that you're very well brought out, and it's something that really must be put out there in minds of people so that we can devise a policy that governs these changes better. Uh, Going on about how people are trapped in their particular locality, I would like to now invite Sumedha to help us better understand how expanding coal and oil production is leading to ecological degradation in these localities and is further again leading to destruction for people living in these localities or near these localities, and how is inequality coming in there?
So hi everyone. So firstly, I would like to begin with one word which would describe my entire whatever I'm gonna say is the illusion of energy, because I think that is what it is. It is not really energy which we are using. Great capitalists are using. People living in metropolitan cities are using, but perhaps the most affected are the ones who are least contributing to it. We see coal and oil as this really reliable, indispensable system of energy and growth. But what we rarely are not seeing, what is hidden, is what is the cost behind the growth we are all chasing. The growth venture capitalists and corporations are chasing. It's sacrifice. People who are being sacrificing their land, their health, as well as sacrificing lives of marginalized communities. So speaking about how expansion of coal and oil intersects with inequality, specifically how emissions and ecological degradation of coal mining, air pollution, heavy metal contamination, water and food contamination, as well as land loss falls mostly on the communities who are being least able to actually resist it, and are the ones who are least participating in these exploitative and extractionist practices. Now, coming firstly to the environmental footprint of coal, now, going over some statistics, coal is by far the dirtiest fossil fuel on planet Earth. According to World Health Organization, air pollution, which comes most of it from coal in form of carbon emissions as well, causes almost 7 million premature deaths every year with fine particulate matter. But that is not where it ends. Air pollution in India alone, relating to coal related emissions, is linked to almost 170,000 premature deaths annually. Now, coal also emits several greenhouse gases, leading to becoming a primary source of carbon dioxide emissions, which now drives climate change and affects low income nations mostly. Now, burning coal releases mercury, arsenic, lead. All these poison the food, water, which people in perhaps villages and living in lower economic localities suffer. Coming to a personal experience of mine, which I had taken a school trip when I was in sixth grade to a small village called Ushagram in West Bengal. And we were there only for 2 days. And in 2 days, I had suffered zinc poisoning due to the water being contaminated. And it was a 10-day long process that took me to recover from everything that happened on my skin. So I don't think we can even begin to imagine what people living there permanently are suffering through, where they are not even aware of the consequences and the problems they're facing and actually who is causing it. We all know the harmful effects of mercury poisoning. It not only affects your kidneys or your brain, it can quite literally lead to organ damage, organ failure, and leading to your death. Now, coming to contamination of land and water, basically when rainwater mixes with acids, carbon dioxide emissions, it causes something called acid rain, and it sometimes also delves into rivers. And rivers directly contaminate every water going into every village. So, just like Shaurya gave the example of Jharkhand, in Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh alone, water near these mines exceeds safe arsenic and lead levels. Coming to now, who shares this burden of actually suffering? It is surprising, but it's a true reality that injustice as well has a geography of sorts. Now, coal plants from where this coal is being mined out by capitalist companies and corporations is rarely located near wealthy neighborhoods. I mean, how often do we see a coal mine inside Delhi or inside Bombay or inside Calcutta? Never. We usually see them around rural districts, villages, indigenous lands, and minority populations. Since we're all from JGU, we must have all seen a huge, quite literally a mountain of trash or garbage when we enter the Sonipat highway. And where is it located? It's not located inside Delhi, even though all the trash coming out, which has been deposited over there, might be from all the rich affluent parts of Delhi NCR, including Delhi, Gurgaon, Noida, but it is right at the periphery of Jahangirpuri. And Jahangirpuri is not only visually can you see the inequality, it is it is placed right there because those people are the least prone to resist it, and they are being the most affected. Now, as well as in poorer states like Jharkhand, Odisha, and Chhattisgarh, these bear the brunt of coal mining and pollution, as well as bauxite mining. A very popular case of the Vedanta Corporation mining bauxite in the Niyamgiri hills of Odisha. While I think this is one of the only progressive judgments that our country has seen where the Supreme Court actually ruled against the corporation and upheld tribal and indigenous rights, where it put an injunction and a stop to the mining which was going on in these Niyamgiri hills, and actually returned back the land which is rightfully the people's. Now, coming, this is not only obviously a India problem. In United States, which it claims to be a first world country and apparently better than everyone else, nearly 6 million people live within 5 kilometers of coal-fired plants. Now, what is not surprising is clearly 40% of these people are people of color. This is a data given by Scientific American in 2012. Now, coming to some real life case studies in India. In India, in northern Chhattisgarh, there's a Hasdeo Aran forest where coal mining operations by the Adani Group are leading to widespread deforestation, the displacement of Gond Adivasi communities, and violation of tribal rights to the sacred and ancestral lands. While despite a lot of people as well as government research bodies have raised environmental concerns, the Indian government has continued to grant clearances for new coal blocks, ignoring recommendations to protect the forest, which is not only a vital ecosystem visually or commonsensically, but it's also a source of livelihood for these indigenous people who are not only being displaced, but their entire sense of life, their home is being taken away. Coming to a different example of Salinas in Puerto Rico. Here, this is a community which is situated between two high-powered thermal coal plants. Now, for years, toxic ash and noxious chemicals from these coal-fired and thermoelectric power plants have enveloped this community, and residents have complained about health problems which ranges from cancer to Alzheimer's. Last year, officials from the US Environmental Protection Agency went to Puerto Rico to investigate this area, only to announce that the town has one of the highest rates of ethylene oxide and highest rates of cancer, which almost ranges around to 140 deaths per year. Now, I think this is a larger issue which is also institutionalized within ourselves. For example, while this might be a little unrelated, but when we study economics in our second year of law school, which we study for 1 year, we are taught a very small portion of the environmental cost of profit maximization. While we're taught about the market and about how companies actually maximize profit, I think the last module or the least important which we regard as is about the environment, which is the environmental cost of these market of these companies actually profit maximizing. We in fact call it externalities. The word itself connotes that we are literally disregarding what actually happens when we look through capitalists and from a corporation's perspective. So I think this issue needs to be regarded from a institutionalized point of view to actually have some change in the real world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sumedha, for that very apt and concise response. I really liked the fact where you brought in economic models, because the fact of the matter is that all of these damages, even the environmental impact assessment reports, which were supposed to be carried across all these initiatives, especially the ones in India, hadn't been done correctly or aptly a lot of times, is because our models, economic models of measuring damage and corruption, do need some updates. They do need inputs from people who bear the brunt of this impact, and they really need to count these things and not just put them up as externalities. Because if we put damage to human life as an externality, then what are we really working towards? So, coming towards a conclusion, I would like to now invite Navya to address the forbearing question for us all. How might India reimagine resource governance to reconcile the imperatives of energy transition with environmental health, cultural integrity, and most of all, ecological justice?
Thank you for the question, Shaurya. India's energy transition is often presented as a story of technological optimism. A nation leaping towards solar, wind, nuclear, and electrical mobility to cut dependence on fossil fuel and assert geopolitical autonomy and dominance. But if we look closer, we see that the foundation of this transition is built on sacrifice zones, places and people whose lands, water, and health are treated as expendables, as Arpita and Sumedha rightly mentioned. The rhetoric of green growth disguises the fact that extraction for clean energy carries devastating social, ecological costs. And these costs fall disproportionately on um, marginalized communities. To reimagine resource growth, we must first confront these contradictions head on and then envision frameworks that prioritize justice, restoration, and sovereignty over profit and speed. In India alone, um, for the first time in history, Indians collectively pay more tax, personal income tax, than corporations do in corporate tax. From 2014 to 2024, the share of personal taxes rose from 38% to 53%, while corporate taxes fell from 62 to 47%. What can we see from this? What we are seeing is, like Sumedha and Arpita rightly mentioned, and Varsha rightly mentioned, that corporates that are doing the most harm aren't even paying for the harm that they're causing. People, the common man, is paying for the harm that these corporations are making, and the taxes that we do pay are going into the pockets of corrupt politicians. The cases of uranium mining in India lays bare the human cost of energy diversification. In Jaduguda, Jharkhand, India's oldest uranium mining site, villagers have lived for decades in the shadow of radioactive waste. Investigations have documented severe health crisis. Like Shaurya mentioned, children born with deformities, rising rates of cancer, infertility, and poisoned farmlands where crops no longer thrive. A report by the Center for Public Integrity in 2009 described Jaduguda as a place where India's nuclear ambitions poured their wastes into a river of death and disease. This was not an isolated accident, but a systemic failure of governance. Waste tailings stored in open ponds seeped into groundwater with no protective barriers, while communities were denied information about the risk. The paradox of lithium and the green sacrifice zones. If uranium reveals the toxic legacies of the past, lithium signals the dilemma of the future. As India looks into to electrify its transport sector and store intermittent renewable power, lithium has become the new oil, but its extraction globally has been tied to ecological destruction. In Chile's Atacama Desert, like Sumedha and Arpita said, and Varsha, the lithium mining has consumed scarce livelihood. Preeti Nair calls this a paradox of lithium, a mineral central to clean energy technology, yet devastating to local ecologies and people. India's own lithium discoveries, such as in Salhaime, Jammu Kashmir, are being framed as national treasures. Wired in 2023 described the region as a mountain village in the path of India's electric dreams. Yet, for the villagers, these are the dreams laced with fear of displacement, of cultural erasure, and of ecological collapse. They were well aware that the national narrative of progress often translates into local suffering, unless governed differently. Lithium mining risks repeating the uranium story, where communities are left with poisoned landscapes while corporations and state reap the gains. When we look at the inclusive energy framework, the task before India then is not simply to scale up renewables and nuclear power, but to radically think how resources are governed. An equitable energy transition requires a framework built on four interlocking pillars: land restoration mandates, shared revenue models, rights based consent, and energy sovereignty for resource rich communities. Land restoration mandates. Extraction has historically meant abandonment. Mines are extracted and exhausted and left behind as scared wastelands with no obligation for remediation. A just governance system must reverse this pattern. Companies and state bodies must be legally bound to restore ecosystem post extraction, recharging groundwater, detoxifying soils, and ensuring that lands can once again sustain agriculture or biodiversity. While this may seem far fetched and an impossible task, it is our task. It is the corporation's task. This is not charity but restitution, compensation for decades of stolen fertility and poisoned commons. Shared revenue models, the wealth generated from uranium or lithium has flowed overwhelmingly into urban centers, defense establishment, and corporate profits, while mining villages remain impoverished. A reimagined framework must mandate that a significant portion of revenues, whether through royalties, taxes, or direct dividends, returns to the affected communities. These funds should not compensate for damages but finance schools, hospitals, infrastructure, ensuring that the resource wealth translates into local development as well, rather than extraction led underdevelopment. Rights based mining consent, extraction without consent has been the hallmark of India's mining regime. Villages often discover projects when bulldozers arrive. This has to end. Free, prior, and informed consent, which is FPIC, must become the bedrock principle of governance. Communists must have the right to veto projects that threaten their survival. This right must be legally enforceable, not symbol. This echoes global norms under the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, but it must be indigenized into the Indians' own legal framework. Energy sovereignty for rich communities. Perhaps the most radical shift lies here. Mining regions are often left with electricity even as the resource power megacities. This contradiction must be dismantled. Resource rich communities should not only benefit from revenues but also have priority to access energy infrastructure, local microgrids, renewable installations, and affordable electricity must be guaranteed so that these communities are not merely extraction sites but participants in shaping energy futures. Energy should not first serve those who bear in energy should not first serve those who don't bear their burdens. Energy should first serve those who bear its burdens. Technology has to come with justice frameworks. Advances in technology, such as direct lithium extraction from aqueous sources, promise lower carbon and more efficient alternatives to conventional mining. But technology alone cannot guarantee justice. If controlled by corporations without accountability, such innovations may only deepen inequalities. Only when embedded in rights based frameworks where local communities own stakes in technology, dictate its terms of use, and benefit from its outcomes, can technology truly fix and contribute to ecological justice. Otherwise, efficiency gains will simply accelerate extraction while leaving old hierarchies intact. And we must also reimagine beyond extractions. At its core, rethinking resource governments requires us to challenge ideology of endless extraction itself. We cannot continue to reproduce the same patterns, digging deeper into earth, chasing the next minerals, sacrificing one set of villagers for the greater good. True sustainability lies in reducing overall demands, investing in public transport over private electric vehicles, prioritizing decentralized renewable systems over mega projects, and nurturing cultures of sufficiency rather than consumption. Without this shift, India's energy transition risks being a green painted continuation of extractive capitalism where ecology's costs are outsourced to the margins. I would like to conclude that India's pathway to a low carbon future cannot come at the expense of its most vulnerable citizens. Mining in Jaduguda and Tummalapalle and the looming lithium frontier in Jammu and Kashmir remind us that the clean energy transition can either perpetuate cycles of exploitation or become an opportunity to dismantle them. A resource government system rooted in land restoration, revenue sharing, community consent, and energy sovereignty offers a way forward, one that reconciles climate imperatives with ecological justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that brilliant response, Navya. I think you very rightly said that any model of energy transition that externalizes suffering in pursuit of national goals or national interests is neither sustainable nor just. when we are trying to approach this larger problem of India's energy story or India's energy legacy, as historians might look at it, we really need to, as you said, radically reflect on how we're working with our existing frameworks and redesign them completely to socialize the benefits of the energy that's being extracted in the first place. We really need to completely undergo a very thorough process where we revolutionize our process and let go of this very extractive, systemic, linear, unidimensional, exploitative system. With that being said, again, a lot of measures that we hope we see in the future remain community centered governance, transparent health systems, environmental monitoring systems, an upgradation of our existing healthcare infrastructure and safety infrastructure in the most exploited zones for the most vulnerable communities, and introduction of alternative sources of livelihood for communities that are already affected. So if they are displaced to a different place, they can set up their own livelihood there again. With that being said, I would like to bring this roundtable to a conclusion. Thank you so much for participating.